I think the prospects of an exemption for Japan at this stage are very low. And I think the most important thing for Japan and other Asian economies to recognize here with Trump and his administration is they're really trying to build a tariff wall, brick by brick. And that has been a pretty, chaotic process so far. But the goals are big for the Trump second administration. They are envisioning something like a permanent tariff that is in place that all countries have to pay in order to play in the U.S. market. And we don't know how high that's ultimately going to be. But I think that's the goal. And the goal is to have a tariff that's high enough to generate significant amount of revenue for the United States. And we haven't seen a tariff like that since the 19th century. So this is, as I say, this is not small ball. Trump second administration is not trying to hit a bunt. It's not trying to hit a signal. It's really trying to hit a grand slam and completely change the trade regime in the United States.
So if we're talking, David, and you alluded to Smoot-Hawley all over again, then how damaging is this going to be for Japan's car exports?
Yeah, and I think you put your finger on it. So, yeah, as you mentioned, Meti Minister Muto was in town, Washington, D.C., asking for exemptions. Of course, he raised steel and aluminum. That's not the main game for Japan. The main game and the existential threat for Japan would be automobile tariffs. And if the Trump administration moves forward with automobile tariffs against Japan, Japan still exports about, I think, 1.4 million vehicles from Japan to the United States, even though it produces a lot in the United States now. But that still is a significant threat to the Japanese economy. And I think that, the Japanese government officials, understandably, are sort of hitting the panic button, right, if they are looking at tariffs on automobiles.
David, if the US administration does follow through on their threats in terms of that 25% tariff on Japanese cars, say, or auto imports going into the US, what leverage does Tokyo actually have negotiating this time versus the first Trump administration?
It's a good question. And I think that what we saw with Canada today is instructive, right? Japan could retaliate. Right? There's a U.S.-Japan trade agreement that was done in the first Trump administration. Japan agreed to lower its tariffs on agriculture imports from the United States in exchange for no automobile tariffs at the time. If the Trump administration goes forward with automobile tariffs, Japan could say, hey, you're breaking that agreement. And so now we are going to raise our tariffs on your U.S. agriculture imports. But that's a bit risky, right? We saw that today with Canada, that Trump could then come back and say, well, I'll put 50% tariffs on automobiles from Japan. So I think Japan, as a last resort, would turn to retaliation with tariffs, that they will work very, very hard to work out some sort of compromise with the Trump administration.
David